Congress will have to make some tough choices to restore the nation's fiscal health. First up, the fiscal cliff. Then there are all the other issues that are important to Californians and those who live in the San Joaquin Valley, including immigration reform, a 5-year farm bill, improving the quality and quantity of water, and a host of other issues. We'll get the viewpoints from both sides of the aisle, with Congressman Devin Nunes, Republican from Visalia, and Congressman Jim Costa, Democrat from Fresno.
From Fresno, the Maddy Report, with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. Congress is being asked to address our many challenges. Perhaps the most daunting is the federal deficit. With our federal budget of $3.6 trillion, an annual deficit of $1 trillion, and a total national debt of $16 trillion, Congress is going to have to make some tough choices to restore the nation's fiscal health. Can the Republicans and Democrats work together and address these challenges? We'll hear from members of both parties. Our first guest is Congressman Devin Nunes, Republican from Visalia. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here.
Well, you know, everyone agrees that the federal deficit is not sustainable and that the cuts have to come from the really big-ticket programs. But each side's been a little bit vague on the specifics. Case in point for the Republicans is cutting defense spending. 20% of the federal budget is spent on defense. And you often hear the statistic repeated that we spend more on defense than the next 17 nations combined. So that's China, Russia, Germany, France, England, India, Israel, and 10 more nations. So what defense programs would you cut to close the $16 trillion deficit?
Well, let me first start by saying that defense has been cut and defense will be cut. And I think it's important to point out that the House of Representatives has passed a budget that would get us towards a balanced budget in over 10 years. The Senate has yet to come up with anything at all, and the President has yet to come up with anything at all. So we're really at a stalemate because we have one branch of government who has put out a plan and passed a plan. The other two of the people that have to all get together and come up with something that works, they have to ultimately all agree.
The House plan, what does that entail?
Well, it entails essentially, it gets us to a balanced budget over 10 years. So you have to reform entitlements, which are basically the largest driver of our debt program. So
is revenue part of the equation at all?
You have to, there has to be more revenue because we're only bringing in $2.5 trillion now. So in order to bring in what will be $4 trillion, you have to grow the economy. So Republicans believe that you can increase revenue by growing the economy.
But I didn't hear an answer in terms of what revenue increases. Are you going to increase the percentage on the tax rate or what?
Gets to the crux of the problem is that there's disagreement on. I don't believe that you raise revenue by increasing tax rates.
So we increase revenue by reducing tax rates?
We can increase revenue by growing the economy. You grow the economy by reducing tax rates. So there's no question that there's a lot of loopholes that could be closed. Mm-hmm. I actually have offered up a plan to close all the loopholes.
How much would that generate? There are a lot of loopholes. How much would that generate in terms of revenue?
Roughly, probably around $400 billion a year.
Okay, but we're still
rough numbers.
We're still talking that we're talking in the trillions that we need to balance the budget, though. So we're still quite a bit short.
Right. So you cannot get to that point unless you grow the economy.
Okay. Let me ask you.
Or cut spending by a whole bunch, more than what I think is even possible, whether you're talking about defense or entitlements.
Right. Well, we're approaching what everybody's referring to as the fiscal cliff, and that refers to a combination of tax increases and budget cuts that are likely to take effect in the beginning of 2013. Now, here's how the fiscal cliff is set up. If no deal is made by December 31st, automatic cuts and tax increases worth $617 billion would occur. 2/3 of the deficit reduction would be in the form of tax increases, and 1/3 would be in the form of spending cuts. On January 2nd, sequestration would take effect. That would be $1.2 trillion in total cuts over a 10-year period, about $110 billion a year, with a 50-50 split between defense and non-defense spending. That would severely cut federal employment and programs, but it would leave entitlement programs generally exempt. There would also be an elimination of the emergency extension of unemployment benefits, that's now up to 99 weeks, and the elimination of the Medicare doc fix that would have increased doctor payments for Medicare. And last but not least, taxes would go up. Individual tax rates would go from 10% to 15% in the lowest bracket, and up to 39.9% from 35% currently in the highest income bracket. And there would be potential increases also in the estate tax, the capital gains tax rate, the dividend tax rate, the alternative minimum tax, and a removal of the payroll tax holiday, which is people are paying 2% less for their Social Security contributions. So with all of this, the International Monetary Fund has said, quote, these measures could result in a huge fiscal contraction, which would derail the economic recovery. So what's the likelihood that we're going to avoid the fiscal cliff?
I don't know. I mean, right now, you have to have a framework. The House of Representatives has a framework. They passed a framework. They passed a budget every year. Senate has passed no budget. President has no plan on the table. Just last Friday, the President sat down with the Senate and the House leadership, and I think Speaker Boehner essentially said, look, here's our plan. You guys need to pass a plan in order to get somewhere. You can't go up to a table and try to negotiate if you have no plan. House of Representatives has one. The other two do not.
Well, I think the President said during the campaign that he was talking about the Bush tax cuts being kept for people under $250,000, but eliminated or reduced for people over $250,000.
That's fine, but the numbers don't add up. So you can, matter of fact, you can confiscate. So the rhetoric is that, well, we just want to tax millionaires and billionaires. The Democrats want to tax millionaires. Republicans are trying to protect them. Well, okay, fine. Put your plan on paper. Let's see how much money it raises. What you'll quickly find is it won't raise enough revenue.
Okay, and you're concerned about the job creators, which your reference to those folks that are making over $250,000.
I'm looking for anything that works. Okay, so I think I like trying to get down in the weeds and go into class warfare, which is essentially what is being done right now, is ridiculous. Look, whether the rate is on the top end is 39 or 35, probably doesn't matter all that much if the rest of the system is completely broke. So we have to fix the entire system and go to a whole new system. But right now, there's no plan on the table except from the House of Representatives.
I apologize for interrupting, but we need to finish this segment. Up next, though, we're going to get the Democratic take on spending, raising taxes, and the fiscal cliff. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're now joined by Congressman Jim Costa, Democrat from Fresno. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Always good to be here.
Thanks, Jim. Well, let's talk about the federal deficit. Everyone agrees there has to be cuts to make difference. To make difference, though, it has to be in the big programs. Both sides, though, seem hesitant to go there. So the case in point for the Democrats seems to be entitlements. We spend 25% of our federal budget on health care, including Medicare and Medicaid, another 20% on Social Security. So where would you cut those entitlements to help us close a $16 trillion deficit?
Well, the fact is that we've got to do both with the cuts, and that includes the entitlement programs, and we've got to deal with the revenue side. And unless we do both, we're not going to fix the problem. You're looking at one of 38 members of Congress who have gone on record voting for the Simpson-Bowles proposal, which is the only real bipartisan plan that's on the table. And it provides over 6 years an opportunity to get our revenues in balance with our expenditures. Traditionally, over the last 5 decades, our expenditures and our revenues have been somewhere between 20 and 18% of our GDP. Today, our expenditures are 25% of our GDP, and our revenues are 15%. That's unsustainable.
But isn't that part of the Great Recession? Less revenue coming in, more stuff going out, spending for unemployment compensation, things of that nature?
Well, but taxes are at an all-time low as well. So, I mean, it's a combination of factors. We've, both under Republican and Democratic administrations, we've continued to spend. But at the same time, we've cut back on our taxes to what is a 50-year all-time low. And there's not a perpetual motion machine in Washington. You've got to balance your revenues with your expenditures, where they were in the late 1990s, where our revenues actually exceeded our expenditures. And that's what the leadership is going to have to come to grips with. And last week's meeting, at least I think, had a bit of a positive sign in which they agreed to put both cuts on the entitlement programs as well as revenues on the table. And so we'll see where this goes here in the next week or two.
What kind of cuts in these kinds of programs are we talking, the entitlements are we talking about?
Well, I think when we're talking about Social Security, the agreement that was reached in 1981 between then President Reagan and a Democratic Congress made Social Security financially sound till 2037. Doing something similar to that, I think, would make it actuarially sound until the end of the century.
But they're talking about possibly extending the age
That's one of the proposals and the contributions that are made. And as it relates to Medicare and Medicaid, those entitlement programs, if left unaddressed, over the long term will comprise 70% of our nation's budget, and that's unsustainable. So we're going to have to come agreements, and it's going to be requiring Democrats to want to, at some level, address the entitlement efforts, and Republicans at some level addressing the revenue. And they're both saying that now, and we'll see where that goes.
Well, you know, we're approaching what's called a fiscal cliff, and there seem to be 4 possible scenarios. The first one is a short-term fix. That includes a partial extension of the Bush tax cuts and a delay of the sequester and some deficit reduction. Kind of a kick the can down the road scenario.
Right.
Second scenario is basically President Obama's scenario. That's a partial renewal of some but not all of the Bush tax cuts. Third scenario is going over the cliff. That's stalemate, where the Bush tax cuts expire and sequester is implemented. And finally, the fourth scenario is some kind of grand bargain, where they'll have spending cuts of $1 to $3 trillion, new revenue up to $1 trillion, possible extension of the Bush tax cuts, possible delay of the sequester, and create maybe a process for tax and entitlement reform, and also deal with the debt ceiling. Which one of those scenarios would you like to see, and which do you think is most likely?
Well, I'd like to see the grand bargain reached. I was hopeful that President Obama and Speaker Boehner were going to do that when we visited this issue here about 18 months ago, and unfortunately that fell apart. We'll know in the next, I think, 2 weeks as to whether or not the grand bargain is within reach. I think the efforts to bring in the business community, some of the top CEOs in the country, and others who are all part of this discussion, can be helpful. And if we're not able by the second week of December to reach an agreement on the grand bargain, then I think what's more likely is the kick the can down scenario, buy some time until next year, delay sequestration, and then try to figure out how we make this work in January or February.
Do you think that there's momentum in the Congress to really do some kind of grand bargain in 2013?
I believe so. We must, and we can. You know, we're not Greece, and we're not some of these other countries that have had financial difficulties. We're the richest nation in the world. And clearly it's arithmetic. It's getting our expenditures, which are now 25% of our GDP, to somewhere around 20%, and it's getting our revenues, which are 15% of our GDP, somewhere near 20%, and doing it over the long term. We have a fragile economic recovery, and I think most economists and most of the people in the know don't believe you can do this overnight. We dug this hole over the period of the last 12 years, if you want to be frank about it. We're not going to get out of it tomorrow or next year, but if we have a plan together, which is, I think Simpson-Bowles is a roadmap to that plan. You can change this, you can change that, but it would allow us over the next 6 years to get our nation's fiscal house in order, and I think you'd see a very positive response in job growth and creation. American corporations are sitting on the largest cash reserves in a 60-year history, over $2.5 trillion, almost $3 trillion. And American consumers are saving at a 20-year high. And there are recent poll results that indicate that a growing percentage of America's population believe that the economy is coming back.
Okay, so there's some reason to be optimistic there might be a solution.
Well, there should be. That's what we're sent there in Washington to do, is to find the solutions and compromise, and that's the only way it's going to happen.
Okay, well, when we come back, we'll discuss some key issues impacting California, like immigration, the Farm Bill, and water, and whether the new Congress will opt for a bipartisan solution to those problems or continued gridlock. That conversation when we return. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Congressman Devin Nunes, Republican from Visalia. So, immigration's a big issue. Do you support comprehensive immigration reform, including a pathway to citizenship?
Yeah, so I think we need to have comprehensive immigration reform. I've long supported it. It's long overdue. I think what has to happen is there's a few different things. One is you have to have border security. Two, you have to deal with people who were here pre-Reagan amnesty, who for whatever reason weren't taken care of by that law. Then third, you have to take care of the people who are here under no fault of their own. And then fourth, you have to take care of the people here who are working. All four are equally important.
Okay, so it's a combination of both dealing with the folks that are here and
comprehensive
enforcement.
is necessary. You can't just pick one or the other.
Okay, let's talk about the 5-year farm bill. Passed the Senate, didn't pass the House. Are we going to see a farm bill this next session?
Well, the one thing that I want to get out on the table is that the farm bill, which is 50, 60 years old, is completely out of date. And we've come past the time where we should have direct payments going to people to not farm.
But aren't we stuck with that because a bill didn't pass?
Well, but we have to fix it. And right now we're not. We're moving that. What the Senate bill does is essentially does the same thing, just calls it something different.
Are you hopeful?
So it's Washington's famous, it's the Potomac two-step, where they said there's no money going to farmers, but really there are, because it moves it into insurance programs that basically the Midwest states will be able to take advantage of.
Are you hopeful that there's going to be a compromise?
I don't know. It's really a matter not of compromise. It's a matter of, can we make the reforms that are necessary, or should we just do away with the program? I think most people would say this is a program that probably needs to be cut much more.
Okay, what about water? It's tied in with everything. You've got the San Joaquin River restoration, the Sacramento Delta, new storage. Are we going to see any federal action on water?
The House moved strongly with the best bill that's ever passed the Congress for the San Joaquin Valley. It was a comprehensive bill that fixed all of the problems. Unfortunately, the Senate did not move. And so as long as the Senate doesn't move, nothing's going to happen. So there's not enough pressure from this region being put on the senators in order to act. So once again, at the end of the day, we're elected to make laws and either vote no, vote yes. But I think we have a responsibility to put our own ideas out on paper. So in this case, we put the idea out. We had a huge vote in the House of Representatives. It passed the House of Representatives. And then the Senate did absolutely nothing.
I've only got about 30 seconds left, and I don't know if you can segue to this, but the issue of cooperation. The Valley delegation has historically worked pretty well together to solve problems. Do you see any opportunities to work with the Democratic members of the Valley delegation?
Well, we always look at cooperation. That's always key. But at the end of the day, we have huge problems in this country. And if one side is saying they want to raise taxes up on everyone, and the other side saying no, how do you have an agreement on that? If one side is for bigger government and one is not, how do you have an agreement on that? If one side puts out a legislation on water and the Senate does nothing, there's not really any room to compromise unless people come out and put their ideas in paper, in writing, in legislative form on the table.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll see that happen. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
When we come back, we'll hear a Democratic perspective on these issues. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Congressman Jim Costa, Democrat from Fresno. Well, immigration is a big priority for a lot of folks. Are we going to see comprehensive immigration reform in the next Congress? And do you support a pathway to citizenship?
Well, I've always supported comprehensive immigration reform. When President Bush proposed it, and you might remember then it was called Kennedy-McCain. And President Obama's proposal for comprehensive immigration reform, that as a member of the Hispanic caucus, we have been pushing very hard here now for 3 years. I think in the next Congress we're going to have the best opportunity that we've had in some time to really pass comprehensive immigration reform that would include a path to citizenship, but not amnesty. It would be an earned path to citizenship. It would deal with the issues of the 12 million people who are here undocumented or illegal. It would provide an earned path that would require you paying a fine. It would require learning English, have a job, those kinds of things. And some form of the DREAM Act combined with maybe ag jobs. But it seems to me that after the elections in November, there is a renewed interest by many of my Republican friends not to be viewed as anti-immigrant. Clearly they understand that there's a large portion of the Hispanic communities that feel that they have been unwilling to address this issue. And I think we're going to see a change, I believe, in the next Congress, and hopefully we'll reach the kind of bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform package that protects our borders, which we have actually doubled in funding for both Border Patrol agents as well as for other detection devices to, I mean, we have the least amount of illegal traffic coming into this country, and we also have to deal with the gang activities in Mexico.
So this is really not a situation of path to citizenship versus enforcement, it's really both.
Right.
Okay.
And you combine the two, and I think if you combine the two in a meaningful way, you'll get the bipartisan support.
Okay, let's talk about the 5-year Farm Bill. It passed the Senate, didn't pass the House. One would assume that in the next session it's going to pass. What's likely to be in the Farm Bill that's going to help or hurt California farmers?
Well, first of all, I still think there's a chance that we could pass it in the lame duck session if we come together with some agreement on the fiscal crisis. And the reason for that is because the Senate version saves $21.5 billion each year for 5 years. The House version saves $35.5 billion a year for the 5-year period. And so if you include the Farm Bill as a part of the package, it gives us discretionary money to do other things with. So, and Speaker Boehner said he's not opposed to considering it as a part of the lame duck session.
A big part of the Farm Bill are food stamps.
Yes,
and
it's almost 80%.
Right, it's a huge part of the Farm Bill. And the question is, I mean, both sides are saying cuts. Democrats say some cuts, Republicans want deeper cuts. So that's really where the problem is?
Well, and you have to meet the difference, somewhere between $21.5 billion and 35, which is the Senate version, $35 billion. The House version, I think you could find a number there somewhere in the middle that would provide that compromise. But for California, it's very important, and these are the reasons why. The EQIP program that provides money that deals with conservation efforts for both air quality and water. The efforts for the market access program to promote our commodities abroad. The funding for research, which is so important to the 300 commodities that we grow here. The crop insurance program. And we provide 70% of the money now for detection and eradication of infestations of various kinds of pests. So from all of those perspectives, and the dairy title, California's dairy industry has been hard hit here this year and in recent years, and this would provide an address to that. So there are a lot of good reasons why we ought to pass a farm bill this year as opposed to next year.
Okay, I'm going to try to see if I can fit in 2 more questions here. We've got a little over a minute left. First question I wanted to ask you about was the water situation.
Right.
So we've got the San Joaquin River restoration, we've got the Sacramento Delta problem, we've got the issue of new storage. Are we going to see any federal action on water?
Well, I think we'll continue to see an effort with regards to, on the restoration issue, we've readdressed the timelines because of limited resources that are there, and we're still trying to ensure that third parties are protected from any impacts. In addition to that, I think we're very close to a settlement agreement on the drainage issue on the west side, there's an effort on the federal and state level with the governor on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan to provide a fix to the delta that would provide 9,000 cubic feet per second of water to go through and get around the biological opinions. Right now we're negotiating for a 3-year interim agreement on the operation of the delta, both for federal and state contractors, that will provide some certainty of water over the course of the next 3 years.
Yeah, covered a lot of ground here.
But in addition to that, we're looking at storage for long-term, increasing our capacity, raising Shasta, and sites, Temperance Flat, sites and Temperance Flat. Both would be significant reservoirs that would add to our supply.
Okay. As I mentioned, we covered a lot of ground here, but I want to get one last thing, and that is, the Valley delegation has historically been noteworthy in its ability to work together, work across the aisle. Some people say those days are long gone, that the Valley is no longer unique or as hyper-partisan as every other area. Is that true? And if not, do you see areas where you could compromise and work with Valley Republicans to move things forward for the region and the state?
Absolutely. I mean, it has become, like other parts of California and the country, more partisan, but it shouldn't be that way. That's not the way Ken Maddy and Jim Costa used to work together, and that's not the reason we have the Maddy Institute at Fresno State that really talks about bipartisanship and provides university students that opportunity. Congressman Denham and I worked together on the modification of Exchequer Dam. I've worked in the past with Congressman Nunes and Congressman McCarthy. It's silly, and it really is not good for our valley for us to get involved in personalities. We ought to be working together on behalf of the people of our valley on those issues that we agree on water, agriculture, transportation. To be sure, there will be differences, and we'll have to agree to disagree on those differences. But we ought to go back to the way it used to be, and working together on behalf of the people of the Valley. The majority of the people that I represent want us to do that.
Well, we'll see if that happens. Thank you very much for being here, Congressman Costa. I also want to thank Devin Nunes, Republican Congressman from Visalia, for joining us. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can sign up for our award-winning e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org.
And now, another perspective.
I know I'm supposed to talk about gridlock and the fiscal cliff today, but I want to start by talking about my Aunt Tiny. Did you have one of those aunts who kind of spoke a strange language? She was from eastern Tennessee, and there was a lot of phrases that she would use to describe situations, particularly poker, because she loved to play poker. She had us play games called Dr. Pepper. Another game was called Baseball, where 3s, 6s, and 9s were wild. Another was called Showdown. I could never quite understand what all her phrases meant, and that's kind of how I feel about the fiscal cliff right now. It's a phrase that has multiple meanings. The phrase comes to us from Ben Bernanke, the Federal Reserve Chair. He said it in a speech this spring to Congress, and according to many observers, he used this cryptic language to kind of save his own behind, really, when testifying before the Congressional Committee. He didn't want to say, raise taxes or cut spending, so he warned Congress, be careful of the fiscal cliff, which sounded tough enough. Fiscal cliff is kind of like the phrase from the 2000 campaign, lockbox. Do you remember that one? Or the phrase super committee from last November. These are all phrases that conjure up some sort of perfect storm that's happening in Washington. Better do something about it, but this time around, I'm not sure Washington will do much at all. Here's why. How much do you want the federal deficit to go down? I mean, really go down. If you wanted it to go down $600 billion, a little more than half of the $1 trillion we need right now, then all of the things that the fiscal cliff implies should take place. But most people in Washington don't really want the deficit to go down, at least not right now. They fear that if you make the deficit a priority, that will hinder growth, the economy will slow, and unemployment will get worse. So Bernanke, who's out of bullets as Fed chair and doesn't know what else to do on the monetary policy side, is asking Congress on the fiscal, budgetary side to get their act together. Just like the issue of the lockbox and just like the issue of the super committee this time last year, my bet is that Congress will kick the can down the road as much as humanly possible. Look at the leadership of Congress right now. It's the same gaggle of folks who were there last year, and their track record isn't so hot. I assume they will only make a short-term deal right now, and then head home to watch college bowl games. They will allow some of the tax cuts to expire on the wealthiest Americans, which is what Obama wants, and at the same time, the president's administration will have to give a little something up to the Republicans on the spending side so the Republicans can save face. Then, starting in 2013, the new budget cycle will begin and the entire federal deficit issue will have to be reconsidered again. They will, in other words, just probably dodge a bullet, to use another phrase my Aunt Tiny would have loved. But the poker game they're playing in Washington is getting tiresome, and I'm tired of all of them talking about their principles and that they can't compromise their principles. Come on, nobody's asking that. You entered politics, and political life is the art of the deal and the art of the compromise. So I have some principles that I think they shouldn't compromise on. You know, it's the same principles that you see on that poster in a kindergarten classroom. Play fair, clean up your own mess, hold hands and stick together. And while it may not be relevant here, it's my favorite on that list, take a nap every afternoon. Aren't these principles that mean something? So surprise me, Congress. Work together this year and get something done. Republicans, forget your silly campaign-based no new taxes pledge that you made to Grover Norquist. We all know that was a campaign ploy. Democrats, stop acting like every single program is sacred and untouchable. When you do, it makes you sound as rigid as the Republicans sound on taxes. So surprise us this time, Congress. No more silly gimmicks, phrases, or fiscal cliffs. As the poster says, clean up your mess, then you can take a nap. I'm David Schechter from Fresno State.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy.
This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.